Welcome to the For Everyday Leaders podcast. Brandon Faust here with you today, going solo. Alex isn't with us today, but this podcast is all about helping people lead in the everyday spaces and moments in life. And today we have with us our good friend, Justin Davis. Justin, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, man. And Justin is an author, speaker, and pastor, and has dedicated his life to helping people experience life change through the power of authenticity. He's planted churches. He's co-founded RefineUs Ministries with his wife, where he shares his personal story with honesty and transparency, inspiring others to find courage to do the same. Justin's the co-author of the best-selling book, Beyond Ordinary, When a Good Marriage Just Isn't Good Enough, which he wrote alongside his amazing wife, Trisha. And recently, here at the beginning of October, Justin released his new book, Being Real is Greater Than Being Perfect. It is a USA Today bestseller. Let's go.
You saying that just makes me smile and giggle because that's unexpected.
It's pushing up all these crazy Amazon charts. John Acuff, New York Times bestselling author, says this about Justin's latest book. My friend Justin provides practical steps for readers to push back against perfectionism, embrace authenticity, and discover real transformation. This book is a must-read for anyone who struggles with self-doubt, shame, or a fear of vulnerability, which I think really hits such a broad, important target for men and women, young and old in our generation.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying reading the book. I'm not done with it yet, but I am enjoying reading the book. And Justin is a sought-after speaker for numerous conferences, churches, leadership events. He's an inspiring guy, inspiring audiences with the message of hope and transformation through the grace of Jesus. Justin loves to spend time with his family, and Justin and Trisha live in Indianapolis area and have 5 kids. So Justin, we met, I don't know, I kind of have like known you from a distance.
Yeah.
And then through some overlap in a church planting network, officed in the same building for a little while.
Yeah.
And lots of overlapping relationships.
Yeah, I love how, well, one, social media makes the world smaller, but then also it feels like the church makes the world smaller. And so it feels like, we were just talking even off air about all of the kind of cascading relationships that we've had over the years that, you're kind of like Kevin Bacon. You're just like, there's 7 degrees of separation there.
I love it. Well, let's get into it. And, I've known some of your story. I think there was a Carey Nieuwhof leadership podcast years ago, and I had known of you. I knew about some of the church planting work that you were doing here in the area in Indianapolis, but I don't know all of your backstory other than what I've read through the books, and then I kind of more know like the Justin of the last few years and all that. So tell us about where you grew up, life for you growing up as a kid, man.
Well, I grew up about 30 minutes from here in Crawfordsville, Indiana, just west of Brownsburg. We're in Brownsburg right now, Brownsburg, Indiana. And so I grew up very poor. Grew up actually in Ladoga, Indiana, which is a town of about 800 for the first like 10 or 12 years of my life. And then the summer before my 6th grade year, we moved to Crawfordsville, moved to the big metropolis. And that was really a hard transition for me. I didn't realize how poor we were until we moved and got kind of, because everybody in Ladoga, for the most part, that we hung out with was of the same socioeconomic status. And so we get to Crawfordsville. My dad's working at a factory, and the wage gap really begins to be obvious to me, and just how I'm dressing, the clothes that I have, insecurity and fear and isolation. I feel like I felt that for the first time when we moved, and I started getting bullied really bad in 7th and 8th grade. I would literally, looking back on it now, I think I had ulcers because I would get physically sick. My stomach would just hurt just thinking about going to school, because I would get beat up either on the way to school or at school, after school. And so it was just a really challenging time, and I felt like sports was my way out. It was my way to fit in. And so I dedicated my life to never being told I was not going to be good enough. And I got cut from the basketball team in 7th grade, got cut from the basketball team in 8th grade, was told by the varsity coach not to go out again, ended up making the team, starting as a freshman, dressing varsity as a freshman, played varsity as a sophomore, began to kind of take off, and got better at sports, but that insecurity and that fear, it never really left. That fear of not fitting in, that fear of not being enough. And that really kind of drove me. I kind of transferred all of that into ministry and wanting to have a big ministry and be important and speak at conferences and be recognized as a leader. And it wasn't necessarily, I mean, I was doing it for God. Right. Yeah. But there was just this lack of security, just a lack of confidence that came out as arrogance, because I was really pretending to be more put together and more confident than I really was.
Now, in that, was kind of ministry right out of high school. Was that kind of the path for you? That was my story, where it was like I came to know Christ in high school, and then it was like that's all I wanted to do. That's all I knew. Was like gonna go to school, turn down D1, sports offers to go just play NAIA and go to a Christian university and all that kind of stuff. But what was kind of that in your mind at that time?
Yeah, I grew up in church, and when I decided to go to Lincoln Christian University, it was really, I was going to go there for a year and then transfer. I wanted to be a basketball coach. I wanted to be a teacher. And then I did a weekend youth ministry my freshman year and led a kid to Christ. I basically did a message. My first message was from Genesis to Revelation. And I ended it with saying, if you don't want to go to hell, raise your hand. And some kid raised his hand. And so I baptized him. And that kind of changed my life. I'm like, oh, wow, it has some power to it. And so I transitioned after my freshman year, stayed at Lincoln, and transitioned more into ministry. And that kind of became my life. But there was always this, even after my third year at Lincoln, I wanted to see if I could make it. And so I transferred to Western Illinois, walked on the basketball team, made the team, and was miserable. And so I transferred back to Lincoln at semester. But there was always this thing in my mind of, could I be bigger? Could I have been better? What if? And so that ministry piece, I felt God called me distinctly into ministry. And I mentioned this in the new book, but I also look back now on 25 years of pastoral ministry and realize I did go into ministry because I felt called, but I also went into ministry because I wanted people to like me. I wanted to feel needed. I wanted to feel accepted.
Give us in that kind of landscape, because I think this is a lot of conversations I've had with pastors the last 15 years or so around church ministry, but also in my own journey and story at 25, being preaching to a few thousand people. There was just something that you're like, I felt compelled to do this by the Lord, but now it's like, oh, this is interesting. This leadership platform, it's easier to justify pointing to yourself, even though you're not pointing to yourself, but you like the attention, you like that people like you, you like that you're needed. Yeah. I mean, I resonate with a lot of that. I've heard that story from a lot of pastors as well. What was maybe like a formative moment that shaped your life in leadership, maybe around that or that tension or that pull? Or
in 1998, I went on staff at a church in Kokomo called Oak Brook Church, and it was a seeker-sensitive church. So they were seeker-driven. They were driven by people who didn't go to church, which the previous church ministries I've been involved in were only driven by people who were already there. They didn't really want new people. So that thing of evangelism was new to me, and we went to the leadership summit at Willow. And it was like, just my mind was blown with the scope of Willow's ministry and Bill Hybels and his communication and John Ortberg and the poetry that he spoke with. And it was unbelievable. It was like a world I never even knew existed. But I think if you look at any modern church leadership conference, no one's being asked to speak because they're patient or because they're kind or because they're nice. People are only being asked to speak because they're crushing it, right? Like, we don't elevate the fruits of the Spirit, we elevate performance. And so it doesn't matter how spiritual you may be or how much of a spiritual giant you may be. If you're not performing, you're not asked to speak at Catalyst, you're not asked to speak at Willow, you're not asked to speak at, at some of these major, the Orange Conference. And so, it was very apparent early on that it was performance and growth and accomplishment and achievement that were going to ascend me as a leader, not faithfulness, not my ability to preach, And so I felt like, how can I demonstrate that I am an upper echelon leader, even if I don't feel like it?
How'd that work out for you?
Well, it worked. It's almost like it's not the fall that'll kill you; it's a sudden stop at the end. So it worked out great until everything crashed and burned.
Justin, what's through that story? Because I think you don't have to be a pastor or have a calling into vocational ministry. You don't have to be the leader of an organization to feel that pull, that pull to want to be important, the pull to want to be perfect, the pull to achieve and to do something with your life. What's kind of a framed everyday leadership principle that, whether you wanted to carry it with you or not, it's something you've picked up on the way that's been really, really helpful to you?
Well, and I make no mistake about it. There's nothing wrong with pursuing excellence and achievement and accomplishment and all of those things. I think for me personally, my character wasn't developed enough to sustain the success that I was experiencing. And so often what happens as leaders is we focus on the success of our mission or our nonprofit or whatever it is, our company, and we don't develop the character along the way to sustain not even the company's growth, but our own personal morality. Yeah. Right. And so that's why, you look at very successful people, they often have plowed through relationships or marriages. There's always a cost involved when you don't develop your character along the way. And that was my story. We planted our first church in 2002. We had 12 people our first week. Within 3 years, we had 700 people. And for me, okay, I'm checking all the boxes, right? I'm going to be invited to speak at the conferences. Like this was before church planting was, commercialized like it is today. And, 3 years into that church plant, I ended up having an affair with my wife's best friend, and everything goes away. Everything's gone. And, it was the biggest crash and burn. And thankfully my wife and I have restored our relationship, and, it's been 18 years of a restored relationship, but it came at such a high cost. And I think as leaders, we don't often count the cost of cutting corners with our character because you don't see it right away, right? Like you look at a P&L and you get that report every week or every month. And so there's a direct connection to business decisions that you're making and the success or failure that you're experiencing. So often, character and moral choices don't show up for a while. We're talented enough or gifted enough to hide the consequences or to avoid the consequences of some of the choices that we make that compromise our character.
I think that's what, knowing you and knowing your story, that's why this book, for me, and I downloaded the audio version of it, and I love that it's you and your voice and not some random person. That it is such a refreshing approach, because I know that you have, gone through such a strong, difficult, redemptive arc in your life, in your story, in so many ways. And knowing Trisha, knowing some of your kids, seeing the power of that, but also knowing that this was not something that probably came through your story very easy to you, to be authentic and to be real in that way. And so hearing your words, hearing the book has been so powerful for me going through that, because I'm like, man, it's so believable to me. It's so believable because I see you living this out. I see you on the other side of it. So what's kind of one thing you'd encourage our listeners? Now, I do want everyone to go buy the book for sure. Please go do that. But what's one thing you'd encourage our listeners with about everyday leadership from your book, or a story that comes to mind of why you wanted to write this book and all that?
Well, I think there's a couple reasons why I wanted to write the book, but I think for everyday leaders that are struggling with change, right? We all want to change. We all want to grow. And I think what we think is, I can perform my way into the transformation that I desire. And I've never really seen that take place. I think one of the Craig Rochelle says, you impress people with your strengths, you impact them with your weaknesses. And I think as leaders, what we think is, I have to have it all together. My team can't see that I don't know what the next step is. I can't let anybody know how insecure I feel. I can't let anybody know how much I'm struggling at home. And so we elevate ourselves in our minds that if anybody knew this about me, they wouldn't respect me as a leader, or they wouldn't want to work here, or whatever it is. We ruminate on those things as leaders, and we think, oh man, I have got to figure this out before anybody realizes I don't have it figured out. And I think what I've seen in my own life personally is that transformation comes not necessarily through pretending to be better than we really are, but by admitting that we're not as good as we think we are. And that's when God shows up and gives us a power to transform. And so I really wrote the book not as a formula, not as a 5 happy hop process, 5 happy hops to a better you. It would be a New York Times bestseller if that was the case. Because I think that's what people want. People want, formulas. They don't necessarily want processes. And so, but the book really is written, as you said, from first person experience and also biblical examples of people who admitted weaknesses and then were able to overcome those weaknesses because they admitted them. And if you look at some of the greatest leaders in Jesus's day were the most pretentious people, right? The religious leaders were the most respected. They had the most clout, and yet they were theoretically they were supposed to be closest to God, and yet they did not get Jesus at all. But the people who were closest to Jesus were the most broken. They were the most needy. They were the poorest. They were the most outcast. And yet they experienced the greatest transformation. And so I think this book could be really good for leaders. There's a church here locally that bought, I think he bought 15 copies to go through with his entire team. Because he's like, I want my team to live a life of authenticity so that we, can experience transformation together and individually. And I thought that was a really, I was like, could you call all the other local churches and tell them to do that? That'd be awesome. But yeah, so I hope that's helpful.
Well, I think that's where, in my experience reading the book, not to make you feel too good about yourself, but in my experience reading the book, in my experience I'd say especially in the last 7 or 8 years following Jesus, it's like when you see things of the kingdom or see ways of discipleship, you're like, that was it. It's sometimes hard to put language to it, but it was like, you would even see times in Scripture where Jesus is like, you guys are getting it right now. Like, this is it. This is the way of the kingdom. This is the parable. This is like a tangible way, and I feel like there are just like glimpses of that through this book, and when you see them, it's like, oh, you got to park there and grab it, and I think that's probably why that pastor was like, okay, authenticity and the pressure to be, a professional Christian as on a church staff, it can be, that maybe sounds silly to some people, but it can be paralyzing. It can be crushing to say, man, I'm really going through a hard time or struggling with something. I think, our family went through a very difficult season this summer with our daughter being very, very, very ill for an extended period of time. And coming out the other side of that, for me, and we have an amazing team here, but it was like, I am very broken. Yeah. I am not myself. Yeah. My capacity is like in the toilet, like I'm not thinking the way that I normally think. My energy is awful. I feel like a terrible leader. I feel like I'm struggling in all these ways. And honestly, as someone who is I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, high achiever, but also recovering people pleaser, as well, to making sure that doesn't mark my identity was so like counter of the default of my life. It was like so going upstream, but the way in which people received me, how they came alongside and were like, yeah, we know, we got you, we got you. And that was such a reminder of like stepping through that door frame of authenticity. It feels very exposing, but it actually like codifies and builds relationships and allows other people to feel like in their time of need to do that as well. And so whether that's in your home, in your church, in the organization you work for, maybe you volunteer with like youth basketball and you do that for another person or parent there, who knows how God's going to use that in somebody's life.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things I think we all have in common as leaders is we got into leadership because, one, we feel like we're gifted in it, but two, we love people and we love inspiring people to a goal. But I think the dark side of that is I think most leaders that I know are people pleasers, right? I got an email from a children's ministry pastor 2 days ago, and she was like, when I ordered your book because I'm addicted to people pleasing, and I'm exhausted. Every Sunday I'm exhausted. I go home and I recount conversations I had and I dissect them. And she's like, and I need to let go of people pleasing in order to move forward. And it was just this reminder that you never know what someone is struggling with. And I think as leaders, we judge ourselves on our intentions, and we judge our team on their choices, and we don't understand maybe why the choice has been made by some people on our team. And I think if you kind of pull back the veil a little bit and go, okay, are they struggling to be authentic with me? It helps us as leaders then to kind of put that people pleasing aspect in its proper perspective.
That's good. All right, Justin. So what's a book or podcast that's impacted you recently, and why?
Okay, so I've got two answers to this. One is as a dad, okay? My son just released a book on October 17th.
I saw that, Micah.
Called Trailblazers. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that. Published by Tyndale. And it's all about discovering God's purpose for your life. And so it's impacted me for a different reason than it would impact another reader, but that's been phenomenal. And the podcast that I'm addicted to is How I Built This. I love listening to that podcast. It's all about entrepreneurs and the businesses that they've built, sometimes the businesses that they've crashed and burned. But it's just, I literally can't get enough of it. At one point, I'm not there now because I had kind of a little bit of a break, but at one point I'd listened to every episode. That's so awesome. I was waiting for the next episode to come out. I'm behind now, but that's been something that's been huge and impactful for me.
I love that. Well, Justin, how can people find you, find Trisha, get involved with what you're doing? I mean, we have the new book that's out. Yeah. We have things going on with RefineUs. How do people get you? You guys are hosting an awesome podcast as well. I saw that Justin Holiday was just on there, which is really cool.
Yeah, really excited about that. I connected with Justin through a mutual friend. For those of you who don't know, Justin Holiday used to play for the Pacers. He now plays for the Denver Nuggets. We connected probably about 6 months before COVID. Okay. When he got traded he signed with the Pacers. I had a friend of mine in Nashville that was really good friends with him that wanted us to connect. So we connected. And then he started coming to Hope City right before we closed it. And then he actually got traded to the Atlanta Hawks at that point too. So
but he's an NBA champ now too with the Nuggets. Of this last year,
cool. So that's been a cool relationship. But our podcast is called Let's Get Real with Justin and Trisha Davis, and it's all about authenticity in life, love, and leadership is kind of how we subtitle that. So you can connect with us on that podcast. Our website is refineus.org. And our heart is to help couples restore hope and renew relationships. And so we do marriage coaching, we do individual coaching, we travel and speak and do marriage conferences, we speak at churches, kind of all over the country. So that's an aspect of our ministry. And then you can connect with me on Instagram at JustinDavis33.
I love it. Where can we find the book?
The best place to find the book is Amazon, and you can go there and just search. I want to applaud you because not everyone, but I would say 90% of the people mess up the title because of the greater sign.
Yes.
And so
that's what helps with listening to the audiobook. Being real is greater than being perfect, right? It has the greater sign. I love it. I love the shirt.
Yeah. But pretty much every radio interview I've done so far, they're like being real over being perfect, or being real, being perfect. And then what's this greater sign, or what's this, this triangle thing here? And I'm like, well, obviously you're in radio because you're not a mathematician. But sometimes you can be more creative than you are relevant, and that's what we did with the cover. So you can go to Amazon, just search Being Real. You don't even have to put the greater sign in there. Just search Being Real, Being Perfect, and it should come right up.
That's awesome. And I would highly, 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 highly recommend it. Like I said, this book is not just for somebody who is leading something, right? And this is for everyday life, everyday people, and that's why it was such a good fit on our show. One, because I think you're amazing and I love you and all that stuff. But I think this is just such a practical thing that so many people are dealing with in their everyday life.
Yeah.
And so I would just strongly encourage you. I purchased the book. I'm reading the book as well. Would love for people to jump on that. And we just want to say, Justin, thanks for joining us on this episode. Thanks to the listeners for tuning in to this this episode of the For Everyday Leaders podcast by Wayfinders. We hope it helps you lead in the everyday spaces and moments of life. We'd love for you to join us on this journey by subscribing to the For Everyday Leaders podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, and would just encourage you. We'll put a lot of stuff in the show links, the links in the show notes around the book, where you can find Refine Us, where you can find Justin, where you can find their podcast, and all of that good stuff. So take a look into the show notes for some of those links as well. And Justin, thanks and congrats on the great book, man.
Thanks, Brandon. I appreciate you having me.